Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Friday, September 7th, 2018, and this is our weekly country roads with our friend Winston Shrout. And Winston is with us. How are you?
Well, a little bit sleepy, but that might be a good thing.
Yeah, well, it's Friday morning, and I am too. Actually, we were up late. I was up late, and this this rally that President Trump had last night in Billings, Montana, was quite interesting. I'm going to screen share really quick, just for a moment.
Okay.
The GoldFish Report 24/7 news page, folks. It's a very great page. Here we have, I don't know if you can see it, I'll try to make it a little bit bigger. Here we have the individual standing behind President Trump, and he had some cohorts with him who were also circled in red. They were also removed. These were people who were like booing, shaking their head when everybody else was saying, and you can, here's the close up of the guy, and his eyes are, this is very classic MK Ultra. I don't know if it was, but it's very scary. And to think that these guys were there, Secret Service did remove them and replace them with some other people in those seats. But if you just look at the guy, he's very bug-eyed, and something doesn't look right, Winston. See that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looked a little bit strange, all right.
Yeah, and what was interesting was Q, which makes it a little bit more suspicious of the whole thing. Q had mentioned um, here, it was talking about, I think this was the comment here, there were some people in the front row of the media section, or right behind the media section, that had Q shirts on. So Q posted, VIP Patriots, and then it was, "We see you." But I think that had like a double meaning, because I think that the Secret Service did see these guys and did see what they were doing.
Hmm.
Aside from that, Q called out Jerome Corsi as a Mossad agent. And of course, he's been subpoenaed, as everybody knows, to testify uh, regarding his association with Roger Stone. So that's also interesting. Here we have a, from last night, a post from Q saying 1 per billion. Coincidence? I don't really know exactly right at this moment what they're talking about, but then it says, "Enjoy the show tonight." So does this indicate that maybe, they had some kind of heads up that somebody was going to be planted there? I don't know. Maybe they're just saying that because it's always like a show when they do a rally. But also a heads up, folks, because Q did post there was going to be this nationwide emergency alert system test planned. And we do know, going back to a post back in November of last year, that Q had said that the president would use the emergency alert system to communicate with citizens, um, when because the mainstream media doesn't report, it won't report some emergency information that the president may need to communicate. So it's interesting that there's a nationwide emergency alert system test planned. So as we all know, the cabal is on their way out and down, but they're not going out without a fight, as everybody knows. So I just kind of wanted to share that with everybody, because that did happen last night, and there was definitely, there were very suspicious looking people. There's more on that on our Twitter page. We posted a lot more of that on our Twitter page, but it seemed like some people were commenting like the energy there was different, wasn't like a usual rally. So I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know.
Yeah, when you get a whole lot of people together and all in the same spot, I mean, there's a huge amount of energy created.
Yeah.
And I think at some of these rallies, though, that at the what we would call the good energy will overcome that negative energy. So
Yeah.
we just have to be careful, because today we're going to talk a little bit about those kind of concepts, a little bit of what I would call metaphysics. But yeah, there's quite a bit to that.
Right. So interesting. So I mean, there's going to be more on that, and of course we'll cover that. And because I have a 24/7 news page, or the Goldfish Report as a 24/7 news page, I don't do like daily reports and updates of what's going on, because we post about 1,000 stories a week. are close to it.
Yeah.
So basically everything that all the YouTubers are talking about, it's already on GoldFish Report, probably way ahead of the game. It's already posted on the news page. So I feel that we've covered our bases because it's already been posted. And, but of course, as our viewers also know, our 3 blogs were deleted by WordPress, and we do have a new blog. And I will just share that real quick before we start, because I want people to know where to find us. And if you do, if anything happens to this one, then we're just going to post right from our BitChute page and right from our second YouTube channel. But that's not without incident also. So here it is, and this is one of the last GoldFish reports that were posted, and it is on the Canary Chronicles, which is our sister page. And also, the other news that I have before Winston gets started is that we are renewing our White House press pass. So GoldFish Report may be bringing some stories finally from the White House, but that's in the works, and we'll see how that goes. So I wish us all luck on that, because we have I think it would be very exciting to be down there, although it's like a pit of snakes, isn't it?
I don't think I'd go in there.
It's like a pit of snakes with with the mainstream media, uh, narrative controllers. But anyway, today Winston's going to be talking about metaphysics with regard to accounting and commerce, and maybe many other things too, and we'll just see as it unfolds. So thanks for waiting, Winston.
All right. Well, like I say, I do what I call left-hand logic on a lot of things. And when we start to talk about metaphysics, we'll talk about that in a moment. The word metaphysics versus the word physics. A lot of times we have been so indoctrinated that, for instance, the scientists who work with physics and so forth, trying to reach into the stars and whatnot, all of a sudden they find out their physics are not correct, and they have to redo, some of it because, the direction they were going was just wrong. It's almost like that astronaut, which one of them was, maybe that, I forgot which one. But anyway, he was mad because when he went to the moon, he got out, and then there was all those flying saucers, and it wasn't ETs, it was people from Earth, and he was mad. He said, "Why did you send us up here in a tin can?" He said, "We have all this." Of course, that that never got out. He was ordered to shut up because that what he actually saw was ships or round wing craft. We had talked about round wing craft development at one time.
Right.
And so anyway, he was mad. Why'd you send us up here and risk our lives on this rocket, or what he called a tin can, when you had all these Cadillacs sitting around everywhere? And so he felt like he had been used. He felt like he had been used. And he was right. Because all that stuff with the Apollo space shots and all that was all for public show. And as far as I'm concerned, it's all a waste of money. But but being what it is, but again, much of what we experience in physics, as an example, probably not right. Probably not right. So we'll go into some of these concepts a little bit today, more in the nature of commerce and some of these concepts. Like I say, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physicist. So I really, I really can't make a definitive presentation on that. But when we talk about metaphysics, it applies not only to science, but also applies to the real world that we're involved in. And, a lot of times our perception of the real world is terribly skewed. I'll just give you a little funny example of it. Because, I keep hearing people talking about constitutional rights.
Mm.
Okay. Well, does anybody talk about constitutional lefts? Do they? You ever hear them? So again, we know, from our physical bodies, as it were, that for balance in our body, for instance, we have a right hand, we have a left hand. What happens if you only have a right hand? What happens if you only have a left hand? Now, so again, just common sense would tell you then in our physical bodies themselves, without a right and a left, we have a physical imbalance. And so, like I say, has anybody thought, probably not until you run into some weirdo like me, but has anybody thought about constitutional lefts? No. Why
Well,
not?
no one really knows what you're talking about, Winston.
Exactly. That's my point. Well, you think about it, people, policemen might pull you over, something like that, and they might read you Miranda, and they say, "Do you understand your rights?" As they've, been spoken to you, and so your response might be, "Well, maybe I do, but it would help me if you would uh, tell me about my lefts."
My constitutional lefts.
Yeah, really.
That's funny.
Well, it is kind of
they,
funny when
they,
you think about it, but
they drug test you so quickly your head would spin.
well, they
They'd whip out that breathalyzer so fast. They'd be like, breathe.
breathe. Well, that's kind of true, but has anybody ever thought of that? I mean, it don't make any sense to me, that we are so prejudiced against the right. Most people are right-handed. I mean, we have a few people who are left-handed. We have a few people who are ambidextrous. Now they're really balanced. But again, in our society, in our concepts, in our law, and I keep everybody just going on and on and on about constitutional rights, and I keep saying, well, why aren't we talking about constitutional lefts for balance? And so,
Good
it's
point.
just something to think about. I'm not trying to make a big deal out of it, but just think about it. Do you understand your rights? Well, maybe I do. I'm not sure, but can you explain to me my lefts for a full comprehension? And so, isn't that only fair? Isn't that only fair? So anyway, like I say, just for thought to get your mind working a little bit, I thought I'd bring that little issue up. Now, last time we had talked about equity interest recovery. And we're going to go a little bit more into that from a metaphysical point of view. But, for instance, when you start to talk about equity interest recovery, it's tax. That's what you're recovering. You're recovering the tax. And, a lot of people have looked at what's called the IRS 1040 form, and they call it a tax return. But the full title of that particular document is tax return of interest to principal. The 1040 form, if used properly, is for equity recovery.
Right.
And people fill it out wrong. Instead of taking it into the calendar year like we had talked about, they simply fill it out wrong as a discharge item, and it rolls over into the next fiscal year because they don't bring it to zero. And so sure enough, people fill out a 1040 tax return, which should be tax return of interest to principal. They fill it out wrong, and consequently, they just roll into the next fiscal year without bringing that fiscal year to a close. And so, a lot of the problems we get into because we, don't evaluate the opportunities. And so could you bring that thing to a close? Yeah. And so people typically, put down deductions, and they do this, they do that, and they get all mixed up, put it that way.
Hmm.
So let's talk a little bit today. I wanted to talk a little bit about metaphysics, because if you just continue with the same physics or the same physical things and misunderstand or don't comprehend what it is you're dealing with, then you, you're going to be forever stuck in the same cycle and you never get out of it. Does that kind of make a little bit of sense? Am I being clear in what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay.
Knowledge is power. No, I think we are in a cycle, but it's been, we've been designed, engineered this way. Sadly, our mental abilities, were, um, I think we've all been impaired through the use of electromagnetics, through fluoride in our water, through lots of things,
Yep.
vaccinations. I think that it's by design, and I think that anything that we can do to help bring us out of the fog that we seem to be in is definitely helpful. Certainly not what the rulers and controllers of the planet want, but that's why I always said, Winston, there's a reason why every nation on this planet has signed one treaty, and that's to not go into Antarctica, and um, it's because they live there, and they have infiltrated each position of all the rulers in
Yeah.
the countries around the world to keep control of the planet. So, folks, I think you should really start to consider this, and the evidence is before us if we open our eyes. So let's have Winston open our eyes a little bit more today.
Oh, I'm good for that.
Yep.
At the very least, I'm not saying I'm right about what I say about everything, but at least I'm presenting an opportunity to think about things in just a little bit different perspective.
Indeed.
And hopefully that's helpful to people.
Mhm.
And so, like I say, if you only think of things in one direction only, then you're not, well, you'll get stuck in it. And like I say, every time I keep, hearing people, loudly proclaiming we want our constitutional rights, I'm saying, well, what about your constitutional left? Have you considered that? So when we get into it today a little bit, I think I want to show some things that might be helpful, at the very least, to get people thinking. Like I say, whether I'm right or wrong, then is inconsequential if I can propose something perhaps that people have not thought of in that particular way. And so I'm not trying to be ignorant or nothing. I'm just trying to say, hey, open your eyes up a little bit, and because there may be other opportunities that you have not discovered yet. And that's what Solutions in Commerce has been about for all these years, is that people are going along in one direction, doing this, doing this, doing this, doing this. And again, what is the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing the same way, expecting a different result. And so if you've been doing anything the same way and you have expected a different result, then what are you? You're insane. You see what I mean? So like I say, sometimes we have to kind
Stuck.
of,
We get stuck, Winston. We get stuck because we're limited in our
yeah.
knowledge, So we have
Well,
to
yeah, knowledge helps out a lot. But what I'm saying is,
stuck.
if you keep doing something the same way every time, and it only makes sense that if you've done a particular thing, if you, for instance, if you've gone to traffic court and done it the exact same way every single time for the last 5 times you got a ticket, and you had the same results, don't it make sense to try something just a little bit different? That's all. And so sometimes, we have to, break out of our box, get out, and take a look at things, a little bit differently. So today, let me
Oh,
start.
there
Go
were two
ahead.
questions. Sorry, there were two questions that I was going to have for you. I think they were
Oh,
um, from viewers that. Let me see. What was the other one? I just forgot real quick. Well, one had to do with the UCC one, and I wasn't sure if there was a report we were going to dedicate to that because I think at some point in our other reports, um, you had come across it, but it wasn't the time to get into the conversation about it.
uh-huh.
And I'm not sure if there will be a time to have a conversation about that, but that's up to you.
We might. That will be one of the topics in our upcoming seminar.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So I don't want to go into it real extensive right now, but there is a lot of confusion about that.
Hmm.
And again, you know, and most of the confusion comes with how to fill the thing out. And but as I pointed out, there's the private side UCC1 financing statement that we call a state form.
Hmm.
You remember last time we were talking about state citizens versus federal citizens? And so a UCC1 financing statement on state form that would be recorded in your county recorders is on the private side, and it constitutes a valid lien. But on the public side, we have the national form, which is filed, with your Department of Commerce, and it's not a lien. It's not a lien. So that was some of the things, over the years, when things would come up, like, way back when, I don't know how many years ago, this OPPT thing started up.
Right.
And they were making all kinds of claims about what they were doing. And I was, when they first came up, I looked at it and said, that's just more gibberish
Hmm.
because they were making all their claims based on filing of UCC ones on national form. And they were making claims on that, which was misleading to people. That's why, I had to do a few interviews.
Hmm.
And my comment basically was, it's too bad they started all that
Hmm.
without consulting me,
I see.
because they were, whatever program that they were trying. I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't have something good in mind, because I believe they did for the most part,
Hmm.
but they started out wrong.
Uh,
They
right.
started out they started out their program using national form UCC1 filing. I looked at it and said, this is not going to end up with what it is they're trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
If they really wanted to end up with a certain result, then they were using the financing statements completely wrong.
Mm.
And I saw that immediately. That's why I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what they were doing until somebody started bringing it up. So I had to, do some interviews and whatnot. If you want to listen to those interviews, if people want to go onto our website,
Hmm.
onto the YouTube or video section, there's two interviews I did. Actually, the lady was from England. She had contacted me on that, and her name was Linda Joslin. So if you go look at the interviews I did with Linda Joslin, where I explain all that, and then I did another interview with Chief Rock up in Canada, where we covered, some of those same issues. But there's
Okay.
lots and lots of confusion about that.
Right. That's why, I mean, I know that that has come up as a recurring question. And since you were talking about the IRS form, it reminded me that that was one of the questions. And also, the other question was whether or not you want to address this now or later, is that there's right now a lot of people uh, on YouTube. Some are financial people who are saying just prepare because this collapse is imminent. And I just wanted to know if you could there was a way to reassure people, or should we prepare them? Just what was your opinion on that? And you don't have to answer it now. We
Well,
can
no, I'll answer
later.
right now. Again, it's what I said last week.
Hmm.
Stop using the word collapse.
Well, this is
You,
what they're saying, and this is how
well, that's
people are.
what I'm saying.
I'm
That's
hearing.
what I'm saying.
Mhm.
use the word correction. So go take their interviews or whatever they're saying, and you substitute the word correction.
Yeah.
Take out the word collapse, and if you
Okay.
insert the word correction in there, and then listen to what they're saying,
Right.
maybe it'll make it just a little bit better sense to you. Because we're not going. There is a collapse, but the collapse is because we're doing a correction of the financial matrix.
Right.
Yeah. So again, the word collapse puts fear into people.
Right, but even a correction can be painful. So what I'm trying to say is, right or wrong term, I understand the difference. It's just, is there something that that people really should know about it in terms of preparing and getting ready for this correction?
Well, I don't know. Like I say, everybody has their own way of doing things.
Okay.
Uh, and so people are saying, well, you should have, extra food on hand, you should have extra water, you should have, extra money on hand. All that. Well, those are just common sense things that you would be doing anyway. Hopefully.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think because people aren't sure what to expect. So they're kind of expecting what the stock market to take what, a 40% haircut or in the because of course, the US dollar is we're going to be replacing that soon. Is that how Trump is going to, because what
The
doesn't make
correction.
sense.
Okay, here's the correction.
Mhm.
They're finally going to do this currency redemption, and then all of a sudden the country will be flush with cash.
Okay.
That's the correction.
Okay. Well, and it's interesting. The reason I ask is because no one's talking about that in this context. And so that's why I wanted to bring that out because, I keep saying, well, and I keep listening and waiting for them to talk about it. And I never hear them talking about this
No, they
redemption.
don't.
Yep. Nobody's
No.
talking about it, Winston. And so I really was trying to give our viewers something that they're not going to get anywhere else. And that's how does that play into this correction that's coming? So that's just a very important
Well, yeah,
information.
I'm very upset. I'm very upset with the politicians, including Mr. Trump, that they're spreading, you know, uh, fear and not giving the people hope. They say, "Well, we're draining the swamp." Yeah, that's great. And so, how long are we going to drain the swamp before we finally get to the correction? And so, people just, it's causing too. It's let's see, I'm trying to think of the right word to use. Well,
It's panic, really, I think.
yeah, it's a panic, and they're not giving,
Mm.
they're not telling people what the remedy is. And when people are making decisions about how they're going to live their life, what they're going to do, and all these kind of things based on lack of knowledge when the knowledge it can be had.
Right,
And so that's not fair.
right.
I don't go for that because
Okay,
I came on the planet to help, not to cause problems. And so we're trying to help people.
right.
And so I give out as much knowledge, as little bit as I have. I try to give it out and try to reassure people.
Mhm.
Like I say, if you just take that word collapse out of your thought process and insert the word correction, that'll make a world of difference in the way you perceive what's happening. And so, like I say, people play to their own fears.
Right, and I think I'm not sure why they're not informed. These are people who try to report on economic reports, and they report on uh, economic indicators and issues, but this has just been absent from the conversation.
Because they live in fear.
Or they need more views. And fear
Well,
clickbait,
we
clickbait,
got the
I guess.
solution. We got the solution for them. We talked about that red pill suppository. That fixed a whole lot of problems.
I suppose it would. Well, no, I think this is reassuring. I'm sorry, to delay you from getting into your
No, that's
discussion,
okay.
but I thought these were two important questions that had come up and I thought it was important if there was a way for us to address this to our viewers because that's all I'm hearing. I mean, and I do listen to other reports, and I do um, listen to other analysis. Not everybody. I only have so many hours in the day, but what I'm hearing all the time talking about and using, of course, the word collapse and not correction. And of course, telling people to prepare. And what does this mean? The question is, I think people want to know what to expect. If you tell
Yeah.
them, look, you're going to, lose 50% of the value of your financial, assets. They want to know that, instead of all of a sudden everybody finding out at once, and then everybody's going to be really angry. You know what I mean? And then there's going to be martial law, and then there's going to be. It's like you can really
No,
do.
not gonna be all that.
No, but what I'm saying is that there's going to be people who
We're
are going
gonna
to be
get we're
very
gonna
angry.
get into it today.
Good. Then let's
Uh,
get.
uh, Again, once you start to understand certain principles and concepts, when you hear all this tomfoolery going on, you say, well, that don't mean anything, because here's reality. Because when we start talking about metaphysics,
Yeah.
because I'm going to relate, private and public, with metaphysics and physics and accounting, and how we perceive, the real, as we think, the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Because the real world only exists inside this skin right here, you see. Everything outside of here
Mm-hmm.
is something else. We talk about the God within, we talk about the God without. And when we talk about the God within, then we have a real relationship with our Creator. We talk about the God without, for crying out loud, we got over 200 different Christian churches. We got all kinds of different world religions. And so when you go outside of yourself, you come into all these fictions. It causes a great deal of conflict in people's brain. That's why we keep telling everybody, go into your heart. There's where the truth lies. And so today we'll talk a little bit about some things that might give people, a pause to think. Like I say, I think I understand a little bit of this, and then I have a hard time expressing it in a way that would cause somebody to think. But look how I started out. Had anybody ever thought about a constitutional left? It don't make no sense, does it? To most people, it makes perfect sense to me. But to most people, they never had conceived of, because all they had ever heard was constitutional rights, constitutional rights, constitutional rights. It's drummed into us. How about constitutional left? Just as a way to rethink things. And so, it's important. If you get into a loop, how do you break somebody out of a loop? It's real hard, because, a lot of people who have become what we would call enlightened, who have, like we say, they've taken the red pill. And so how do you deal with your family, your friends, your neighbors who have not come to that realization yet? And it's very difficult. So what can you say that would jog them into considering something just a little bit different? That's all. And so, me and my crazy left-hand logic, a lot of times, I ain't saying that I'm a great philosopher or even a smart person, but at least I can, get people to jog a little bit, and think about, is the world exactly as I have perceived it?
Mm-hmm.
It may not be. And that's why we did that one article on that journey to the inside the earth at Dorpa.
The Dorpa, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that guy was in the box, and they had to jog him out of it. And the only way they could physically do that was they took him underground on a journey. And finally, he got to the center of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, he did. And once he got there, then reality changed for him. And so, again, we have these examples of those who have experienced these kinds of things. And sometimes you just have to, put pressure on people. That's all. So anyway, let's I want to start out with an article I've written
Mm-hmm.
some time ago. Is that up?
No, not yet.
Okay. Maybe okay, do it again. Oh, okay, yeah, I did it wrong. Sorry. Like I say, I didn't get a whole lot of sleep last night, and so
I hear you, Winston, and it's a Friday morning. It's been a hot week up in the Northeast too. So
how about that? Is that up now?
yes,
All right.
metaphysics class. This is interesting. Can't wait.
Oh, yeah, you can. All right. So
I'll have to.
anyway, this little article I'd written some time ago. I think I probably wrote this in connection with Accepted for Value. I had done a series of 3 DVDs on Accepted for Value because that's an interesting concept. You learn ever so much when you understand the basis of it. And so I'd felt like, that maybe I needed to make a presentation, and I did. I made a presentation on the metaphysical aspects of accepted for value.
Hmm.
Metaphysical.
Hmm.
Because to comprehend, you're going to have to comprehend it from a metaphysical point of view. So let's look at, we use the word all the time. People hear about metaphysics and gurus and people sitting on top of a mountain, when people going up, you hear all kinds of funny things. But let's break it down to a little bit closer so we can understand it.
Okay.
Anyway, let's look at the word metaphysics, and out of Wikipedia, the word metaphysics derives from Greek words meta, which means beyond, upon, or after, and the word physics, which talks about the things in the third dimensional real world. So metaphysics is a traditional branch of philosophy concerned with explaining the fundamental nature of being and the world that encompasses it. Although the term is not easily defined, traditionally metaphysics attempts to answer 2 basic questions in the broadest possible terms. Number 1, what is ultimately there? And number 2, what's it like? So in many instances here, we're trying to discover things that are not apparent. And once we discover some of those things, then what's it like? See, this is a problem that Einstein wrestled with, and that was he had the relativity concepts, which dealt with physical science that was understood and so forth. But he never, apparently until the day he died, or shortly before he died, he never understood unified field theory. See, and so there was a limit. And so in Einstein's case, if we can use that as an analogy to what's being said here. So on the physical side, as he understood it, he was very adept. Mm-hmm. And so, but again, he still had the same question that so many had. That was, okay, well, what's it like?
Right.
And so the same thing we get involved in. So we grow up, we go through school, we go through the various elements that are necessary for us to function in society as we suppose, and so forth. And so we have a way of doing things, which is insanity, because again, doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different result is insanity.
Agree.
Yeah.
Or it's just hopelessness. Or it's hopelessness.
Yeah. So if what we're doing in a loop is insane, how about let's take a look at anything else to see if maybe we can get out of this loop. And so that's what Solutions in Commerce, basically done over the years. It said, okay, well, you've been doing it this way. time and time and time again. Look at the result of that. Do you want to keep doing it that way? Or is there another way to perceive what's happening that would cause a different result, which might be favorable? Not guaranteeing it, but it might be favorable. And so it only makes good sense, to take a look at things from a different point of view. So anyway, that's what metaphysics is all about. Is getting outside, taking a look, discovering something different, and then just asking the question, well, what's that like?
What is beyond the physical world? That's what it's saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Beyond the third dimension.
And Jesus said there's more in the unseen, right? Didn't he say that?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, then it talks about what a metaphysicist is, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I'm making a few comments here. So in our present developed methods of commercial activities, if we ask what is ultimately there and what is it like, we would have to go out of the purely physical world to get an understanding of why we do the things we do. Remember that we are all creative beings. We did not create ourselves. See, when you start to look at, world events, world history, you can go way, 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 way back and look at what the people did. And you say, okay, well, history repeats itself. Well, it sure in the heck does. Why?
Because we didn't learn.
Because people do the same thing the same way and expect a different result. Mm-hmm. I was just watching a program on PBS about Vietnam. I was interested to look at the causes of it. Then I'd been watching another presentation on World War II, and it's the same thing. It seems like the world gets into a loop, and they don't seem to be able to break out of it. And so, is there something that we could do that would cause a change on the planet? See, now
funny you were watching that because I was watching the Philadelphia experiment.
Oh yeah,
yeah, funny going back in time. That's pretty interesting stuff there, but beyond physical for sure.
Well, yeah, in certain respects.
Yeah.
But again, if you go back in history, the only thing that's consistent all through the thousands of years, that we have recorded history is war.
Yeah, sadly.
Okay, so if we're in a war loop, how we get out of it? Is there a different way to do things that does not cause war? And that's what was anticipated with the plan of the experts that I referred to before as a way to stop war. Mm-hmm. And then it got hijacked and subverted, and so we had yet more wars. That's why I say, if the plan of the experts had a chance, I believe that it would have succeeded. I believe that it would. Now we're coming into, a new era, as we hope. We think that we're going to get away from this war mentality. We're going to do things differently. And how will that be facilitated? By a change in our money. Now, this new change into the new United States notes and stuff is not the final answer. But it will solve one problem that we've had in regards to the use of Federal Reserve notes. And that problem has been interest for the use of those instruments in our commerce. And so the United States notes are going to, even though, like I mentioned, we're still in the debt currency system. At the very least, we're going to have one correction, which is that the United States notes are going to be issued by the United States Treasury and not a private central bank. Now, like I say, this is not the solution to end all problems, but it'll solve at least one problem. And if we can solve one problem, then we'll keep moving forward until we have all the problems solved. But you can't have a resolution to the whole problem until you start picking away at it and getting rid of some of the things that are causing it. I mean, when you go to a doctor, you tell the doctor, well, I feel bad. He said, really? Tell me your symptoms. And so he might say, okay, well, the first thing we need to do is get your vitamin deficiency brought back up. Or you might have problems, that you're not getting enough oxygen into your blood. So there may be a multiple scenario where there's several problems, all of which contribute to the others. And so a physician or a healer would say, okay, let's work on all these different things, and you can't solve all of them with one pill, but you can start to work on something, and then once you got that solved, then you can work on something else and something else and something else. So again, in our present situation where we're trying to resolve the financial situation, obviously the that's the first thing that needs to be solved. And so that's why it's so irritating to me. That's why it's so irritating to me that they got all this crazy stuff going on, talking about this and draining the swamp and putting all these things going on, and they still, the politicians who are trying to control the narrative, as they say,
right,
are still holding back the number one step into resolving these other problems, which gives me the idea that they're not altogether that interested in solving the big picture.
Well, they've all been bribed. So once the big picture is opened, they're all going to be, indicted, or people are going to be angry. They don't want that day to come, but that day is here. It
Yeah,
looks like, I mean, and this Kavanaugh confirmation was ridiculous. So it just goes to show that the state of things is decaying, and but only out of chaos can we have a rebirth here. These are our birthing pains. So
yeah,
hopefully we'll.
yeah. It's unfortunate that the public generally are so poorly educated. That's what we're trying to do with our GoldFish and country roads reports and so forth, is to educate people, because I could care less about Kavanaugh or the Supreme Court, because again, which Supreme Court is that? They're the ones that rule on statutes, all of which are fictions. They say, well, is this law over here, is it constitutional? Is this law constitutional? And my first question is, which Constitution are they talking about?
Right.
Is it the Constitution that was put out in 1789? No. It's the Constitution that they took and statutized. That's the Constitution of the United States. That's the one that the United States Supreme Court rules on. Yeah. They don't rule on the Constitution of the United States of America. They're incapable of doing so.
I think we talked about there being two constitutions at one point, very early on. Yeah. We're almost done with our archives for the country road, so they should be up. Go to our website at thegoldfishreport.com and click on the archives page, and you'll be able to look up some of the concepts of things Winston is talking about right now. They should be up. They should be finished by this weekend, in fact.
Cool.
It's just if you upload too many too quickly, they flag you, and then they delete it. They delete it all on you, and then you're like doing it all over again. They're really attacking GoldFish Report. And folks, just spread this far and wide. Really, that's all we care about, to get the information out.
Yeah, there's a reason why they would attack. I mean, they don't attack liars and fools. They attack GoldFish because of the information and the truth that's being put out across the GoldFish Report. And so yeah, we get attacked in our in our presentations. We get attacked, in our physical bodies. And that's why I've mentioned to people on air that Luis is getting hit with a lot of stuff that people are not aware of. Well, I am too. But anyway, let's not worry about that. Let's get on some of this other.
Move on.
Okay, so for instance, we go to college to learn accounting, business, finance, and so forth, but it appears that we learn these things simply as a rote exercise. Then we go out into the real world, and we find that what we memorized by rote must be reanalyzed in order to make things work. It's true. I mean, like I say, I spent all that time in college. After I got, and after being in college and then getting out in the real world, my thought process was, well, I didn't really learn anything until I left college.
True.
Really, I didn't really learn what worked and what didn't work until I got away from college. And so apparently then what I was exposed to was theoretical. And the theories might have been right, the theories might have been wrong. And so we find this. Friends, just as an example of it. Like I say, you and I both, had studied in the world of psychology and so forth. And then I was reading one article. I mean, it started in the 90s. I think I referred to that Greenbaum lecture.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But anyway, as a result of that concept, because see, most of the psychiatrists and psychologists and so forth hadn't considered certain things, and that was, some of the therapists were trying to help people, and they could get them up to a certain point, even with the knowledge that was in the Greenbaum lecture, and then they got to a certain point, and they didn't seem to make any further progress with the people that they were helping. And you know what? Put them over that hump. They started to understand demonic possession.
Oh, right, the demonic possession. Oh boy, did we
Oh yeah.
learn a lot about that.
Now, is that metaphysical? Yeah. Oh yeah. It is.
Definitely.
So it's it's the same thing. We're always learning, we're always progressing. But if you run into a block and you can't seem to get past it, think about something else. Is there some other factor here that we haven't looked at? And so when we look at social engineers, we look at psychologists, sociologists, all these kind of people, who are studying how it is to make things work. Because you were involved in policy. What do you call that policy?
Now, public policy.
Yeah, public policy.
Right. Mm.
And so even in studying the public policy, I'm sure that the classes you were taking, that from time to time in that science, you come into a block, that simply didn't seem to be gotten past. And
Boy, you could say that again, Winston.
well, I'm just referring to the science itself, not your situation in particular.
No, but the science, when you questioned it, then they blocked me from even re-registering because they knew, like when I was talking about the Federal Reserve, and I said that it was a private institution, the professor immediately had to correct that.
Yeah.
So he was very well aware of an agenda that there were bounds you could not go outside of, and
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, and so it's this way, major breakthroughs, have to be done outside of, the institutions. That's what it amounts to. And it's the same thing if you get into the physical sciences. I mean, especially, like I say, I've referred to these books that was written by Sean David Morton, these Sands of Times.
Right.
And this main character in there, he was college educated. He had a PhD in physics, and he had gotten to a certain point that he couldn't get past. And then an interdimensional entity came in and explained to him certain formulas and calculus and so forth that would get him past. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we have to have an intervention. And so in our society, in our finances, in our commerce, in our physical sciences, in our healing arts, when we get to a point where we don't seem to be able to get past a certain problem, there might be something, that we would find out, or or at least try something different. If it ain't working, try something different. If you're butting your head against the wall all day long trying to figure out something, well then, do something different. Go out in nature instead of butting your head against the wall, butt it against a tree.
Well, the thing to do is to take that time. I mean, I wouldn't just pass over that too quickly, because if you have time with yourself, you get to reflect and ponder life
Yeah,
and concepts. And if you don't give yourself that private time to do that, all we're going to have is basically our life is going to be a result of being programmed, because you're just going to believe everything that you're receiving, and you'll never stop and really think and question whether that sounds right. And that's what they're hoping. They're hoping that we don't do
yeah,
that. They've kept our lives so busy just to exist, that we are so busy that we don't have time to do what the old philosophers used to do.
yeah. I'm kind of reminded of that story about Gandhi.
Hmm.
Gandhi had reported that he meditated 1 hour each day,
Hmm.
and so somebody criticized him for it and said, "Well, you're spending an hour out here meditating, and all these difficult things are happening. Isn't this a waste of time?" And his remark was, "If I have a very difficult situation that I'm trying to resolve, I meditate for 2 hours."
Right.
you know,
Exactly.
so like I say, sometimes you get locked in,
Mhm.
and so you just need to do something a little bit different. And if meditation is helpful, I would recommend to people to go back and listen to that video we did with that pilgrim,
Mhm.
and she gave some wonderful hints
Mhm.
of how people could uh, change their life. Put it that way.
Oh yeah, that's why I wanted to do that interview, Winston, because
Yeah,
there's nothing like having time to yourself. Sometimes it might end up being forced upon you, because
could be.
you're not really, well, there's times in life when we don't want to make changes, and then we suddenly find ourselves being forced to make them. So,
Yeah,
that sometimes comes that way when we are creatures of habit, and we do like to um, you know, be, I guess, stable in our life circumstances. But sometimes change is growth, and the only thing we can really guarantee in life is change. So we do have to embrace change,
yeah,
even if it's uncomfortable, even if there's an unknown variable there.
uh,
We do have to embrace
yeah,
that.
yeah. So anyway, let's go on a little bit. Perhaps what we conceived of on paper were incomplete. So when we journeyed into the third dimensional world, and even at that, we encounter situations where we need some extra
Mm.
help to conceptualize the solutions to problems in the third dimension. Does that not point to the necessity of going metaphysical? And what that points to is getting help from something which is beyond our normal physical world.
Right.
And that's why people pray to God.
There you go.
They're looking for something that's beyond what they're involved in. And we're asking for answers, we're asking for help. And that's purely metaphysical. You're going outside of yourself and requesting an intervention or some kind of knowledge or whatever from some entity. If you want to call it God or whatever, it's okay. But we're looking, for help that's not presently available in our physical world. So that's
Good
why
point.
people pray.
That's a
Yeah,
great point. Great analogy. Great way to look
yeah.
at it.
Okay, so for years and years, we've conceptualized our commercial world from a purely third dimensional perspective. For instance, we have relied upon accounting procedures to determine our success or failure in commerce. Why is it that accounting has become the judge of commerce? Is the bottom line that is it the bottom line that we're most concerned with? Are we in the black or are we in the red? Why has that become the judge of commerce? Are there other aspects of commerce that ought to be considered, situations the standard accounting do not address? Okay, so I'm going to say yes, and there's another concept here I want to put up. It's this one here. Okay.
And bounds.
Yeah. These are two concepts that we've talked about a little bit in the past,
Yep.
which goes right along with what I just read on this other article that I'd written, and that is the concept of meets and bounds. Meets and bounds are a method of measurement. In other words, we had talked about original issue.
Mhm.
And for instance, when a baby's born, first thing we do is start to describe its physical dimensions. 22 inches long, 7 pounds 5 ounces, etc. And we had to measure the baby. Well, there's several reasons to measure a baby, but one of the reasons why that baby was measured was so that it would be known how much gold to put on that gold certificate that we call a certificate of live birth. That's the reason why they say, okay, the baby is 7 pounds, 5 ounces, because they were equating that.
Mhm.
And so, a big baby would be, more gold, and a little small baby would be a whole lot less gold. But anyway, they had to measure the baby to know how much gold to allot to that body. Now, we've talked about this in the past, because again, they needed to take the whole business into commerce to create the funds necessary to account for the life, that they perceived would happen with that individual while they're here on the planet, because they had to create the money to accommodate it, because the baby itself was the original issue, now wasn't it?
Original issue.
Uh-huh. And so if it's going to be a part of the society, if it's going to be a part of the commercial world and so forth, they had to create the money so that everything would be what? Prepaid. You see. So, the measurement in that case was very necessary, just because of the financial system, that we operate with. Now, is there something wrong with that? No, not really. Not really. But then if we want to get out of the third dimension,
Right.
and get into a higher vibrational frequency, we would, instead of using the term meets and bounds,
Mm.
which is a quantification,
Right.
then we want to get into a qualification perhaps, and the phrase we would use would be just, needs, and wants.
Mm.
Just, as in justice.
Right.
So when you start to talk about what is needed,
Mm.
then you get out of the finite and you get into the infinite, because God has infinite resources at his or her disposal,
Mhm.
and he can distribute those things from an infinite point of view. That's why we say God is infinite. And so how much? And on the meets and bounds, when they're creating the gold certificate, depending on the weight of the baby and all that kind of stuff, they're creating a finite, in essence, a finite situation there, and literally, they did statistical analysis using the life insurance actuarial tables to figure out what the exemption would be for taxation for the original issue. Now, this is pretty deep, I understand. People might have to think about this for a long time. But again, like I had mentioned, when my brother died,
Mhm.
now his estate didn't nowhere match the exemption from taxation that was available. But in his case, he was born in 1953. And his exemption on his will as it went through probate was $750,000. In other words, if he had $750,000 in his estate and he passed it on to me, then that $750,000 value would be exempt. If he'd had 800,000 and he passed it on to me, then the 50,000 that would be taxable because of the exemption that was created when he was born. And, using the concept of meets and bounds. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. But so you're
Yeah.
saying that there's an actuary, there's a formula for life
Yeah.
insurance that
Uh-huh.
will reconcile that.
Yeah. See, I was born in 1948, and my exemption under that system would be 685,000. Now, in my brother's case, there's 5 years difference between us.
Hmm.
And so from when I was born in 48 at 685,000, by the time he was born 5 years later, it got all the way up to 750. And then the ones who are born today, I think it's several million, because again we have inflation, devaluation, all those kind of things. But these things were actually literally calculated. We're not making this stuff up. Now, how does that work with just needs and wants? See? And so when you start talking about the infinite versus the finite, as we're operating with, start talking about the infinite, then your concepts change. And so the question is how much exemption, or how much, in dollars and cents value, is me in the financial system as it presently exists. And then consider, what is my value to God? What are the prospects, that are available when I'm not dealing with the government, when I'm dealing with God? And so on the one hand, you have the finite, on the other hand, you have the infinite. So you have, like I say, from a metaphysical point of view, what are our prospects? And they're infinite. We are infinite beings. And so that's what I was just trying to point out. And so these two concepts that I'm talking about here are kind of demonstrating that. And so if you can understand meets and bounds, because that's what we operate with. I mean, for instance, when they go to tax your property tax, what's it based on? Meets and bounds.
And bounds, it absolutely is.
Yeah, it's in township such and such. It's in lot number such and such. And
Locked
they
in.
got the geography right down to the gnat's eyelash.
Yeah, right down to the last inch. Exactly.
Yeah. But when you get into just needs and wants, see, and so different societies have operated on different principles. And so if you were to go and evaluate and make a comparison between the original inhabitants that were encountered by the Europeans, well, which of these two systems would those people have been apparently operating with? Just needs and wants.
Yeah, needs and wants, that's all.
Uh-huh. It's the Europeans that introduced meets and bounds, which were, not compatible with the way that the people here, looked at things. And so we, like I say, we have to conceptualize these things. If you look in the New Testament, there were two occasions, when Jesus had been out preaching to the people, and he knew that he couldn't keep their attention for very long if their belly was growling. So what did he do? He took a couple of fish, he took a couple loaf of breads or whatever. He fed, on one occasion, was it 2,000? Another occasion, he fed 5,000 people. How did he do that?
Mm-hmm.
Because he was operating on the infinite. I mean, if he'd take those two fishes and cut them up into 2,000 little small things, every person would only got this much. Mm-hmm. But because he didn't do it that way, they said that they gathered up, several bushels of excess food that was left over after everybody, was fed.
Mm.
So how'd that happen? See, and so when you get into the metaphysical thought process, then you can start to expand your understanding and so forth. Now, let me. I want to. We had talked about in the past some of these things. Before I get into this next little section here, I want to, like I say, I don't know how to make things on my computer, so I had to draw it on paper. But we've talked about this in the past. Is that pretty plain?
Yes, we can see
Yeah.
that pretty good. Private asset, public liability. Yep.
Yeah. So in our present accounting system, because of the monetary system, then we have gone into a concept known as double entry bookkeeping. And so it's we get into the either or. It's either an asset or it's a liability, one of the two. And where will all assets come from? The private side, the real world. I mean, we're talking about bricks and mortar here. We're talking about, things that you can physically deal with. But when you get on to the other side of the equation on double entry, what we call the public side, we get into liability. Is there such a thing as a liability? No, it's only a concept.
Right, it's fiction.
It's a concept.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any debt on the planet? No, it's a concept. And so when you get into the public, for commerce and all these kind of things, we're only dealing with concepts. We're only dealing with fictions. We're not in the public. We don't deal with assets. Now, we use those words, for the sake of accounting, but I'm just trying to say an asset is something that's real. It's bricks and mortars. For instance, it's a house. It's a brick house. But when you start to talk about liability in relationship to that brick house, now we're talking about the title to the brick house. And people need to start to differentiate these things, because as we have struggled with, dealing with some of these mortgages and foreclosures and stuff, people simply have not been able to differentiate between the red brick house and the title to it. We spend a lot of time on this. And so hopefully people are getting to that point. Now, I wanted to go into also something that we had learned in our in high school about what we call grafting. So I just want to. How's that? Is that, you see all that?
Right. What's the negative vertical axis?
Well, I'll get into that.
Okay.
But on this grafting system that we learned in high school, it's simply a way to explain things. And so the vertical line I've written down that's the private.
Yeah.
And then the horizontal line I have listed as public. And you can look at it from the sense of commerce. Okay? Mm-hmm. So horizontal is commerce, vertical is private. And where they intersect, what is that? It's zero.
Zero.
Yeah. Where the private and the public come together, that's zero. Now, in the accounting that we're using, again, on the horizontal, if you go, +1, or if you go -1, it doesn't make any difference, because it's always a derivative of zero. Always a derivative. Okay? Now, so when we start to talk about the adjustment of accounts in commerce, where do they always have to get back to?
Zero.
Yeah, they have to get back there. I mean, this is well known. I mean, accountants know this. Bankers know it.
This was the first question you asked me on our reports, Winston. It's the very first question. Count on the number line. And I got it wrong. I couldn't count the number line. I didn't include zero.
Yeah, well, people typically do that. Now, Okay, so here is here is in the beginning. This is how it all was.
Mhm.
So we have the zero there, and then all of a sudden we start to move away from zero. Does that cause a problem? Yeah, because in order to get justification, we had to justify the books, rectify, what do they call it in accounting? You have to get it all back to zero. All right, now, so let's say that we go down here and we go, down this commercial line down here, and let's say we get over here to 5.
Mhm.
All right. Now, how do we get back to zero? Do you apply a -5 to it? Well, you could, but one of the easiest ways, and this is one of the ways that we've tried to talk about, if at 5 you simply go, if you simply go vertical, then you have reestablished your zero. Now, this is what I was trying to point out in King James with the occasion of the crucifixion. If you recall, according to the story, there were 3 people crucified on the same occasion. There was Jesus, there was a thief, and there was a murderer. All right. At that point, that thief couldn't apply a -5 to his 5 crimes. Now, could he?
No.
So what did he do to create zero? He accepted. He accepted the surety. He accepted the redemption. See? And so in the physical, I mean, in the accounting world, you could apply a -5 and get back to zero. But in the real world, where things have happened that can't be reversed, then you have to do an acceptance of the surety in order to get to paradise or to get back to this zero. Now, does that kind of make sense?
Right. So he had to accept that he had to accept that Christ was there to redeem his sins or
Yeah.
his debts, actually.
Yeah, he had to accept the prepay.
It was that simple.
It was that simple.
Yeah.
Because again, when you get into the New Testament, like we have pointed out, it was a trust situation, and the trust asset was what Jesus had accepted at the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, it's a sweat and blood thing. It's the God within, it's the God without. The God within was the blood, the God without was the sweat. And so, I mean, I hope I'm not mixing people up too bad. But what I'm trying to point to is that very concept is the basis for acceptance for value. And like I say, a lot of people have heard about acceptance for value, and probably they don't understand where it came from. But one of the very best examples is the story of the crucifixion, because again, there was an asset. Now, so when we do an acceptance on a debt or on a liability in our commercial world, what is the surety?
The prepaid account.
Well, what caused the prepaid account? The gold
The
certificate
gold, yeah. Hmm. That's
created the exemption. Remember how I told that everything?
right. Well,
That,
that's what your Treasury Direct account is based on.
well, yeah, the Treasury Direct account is get back to the global debt facility. But anyway, I'm just trying to, in visual and in real terms, explain why it would work this way. Now, this was a program that was put together by God. This has to do with just needs and wants. This is not metes and bounds. Jesus hanging on the cross and the thief accepting the offer from the prepay, because Jesus was the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. He took upon him the liability and the burden because he could in the Garden of Gethsemane. And then the accounting was done on the T-square when they nailed him to it. And when he gave up the ghost, as it says, his last words were, "It is done." And what did that mean? Zero balance.
That means debts were prepaid.
Yeah.
So God created this experiment on earth and says, you're not going to be, your debts are going to be prepaid because this is an experiment.
I wouldn't call it an experiment. It has been done other places.
The grand experiment. I don't know.
Well, it's not an experiment. It's not an experiment if it's been successful other places.
Well, no,
it's not
I'm
an
just
experiment for me or you.
Well,
the
I'm just saying.
process and the program, is fixed and sound. It works.
No, I meant the experience of incarnating here.
Oh, yeah.
This was an experiment, not the financial system, but in order to exempt you, so we were pre-exempted from our wrongdoings via this system.
And that's why we had that allegory where we finally got down to the new and everlasting covenant. See, I'm trying to put all these things together.
Exactly. I'm trying to as well. So I'm hoping I'm helping the viewers.
It's pretty rough. I'll have to admit, it's pretty rough to, put all this stuff together. That's why, some of these things we've gone over several times to try to relate them so that it doesn't seem disjointed, but they all fit together. That's what I'm trying to do to help people a little bit.
Right, and I'm familiar with a lot of this. I'm not an expert on this like you are, but I'm familiar enough that I'm connecting dots, but I can see where they're may be difficult to connect as I was learning them. So that's why I try to clarify things for the viewer,
Well, you're not gonna learn it in church. You have to go outside of church. Oh man. You do.
Jesuits took control of that to manipulate you because they've been trying.
Well, all the churches have. All the churches have, not just just them. I mean, like I say, I was raised up in the Mormon church, but the only way I could get to the point to comprehend these things was to get outside of it. Lucky for me, they kicked me out of it. That's pretty good luck, I think, because once I got outside of it, I didn't have the conflict of the orthodoxy versus what the truth was. There's no conflict at that point because I didn't have to go into conflict, with the church itself in order to understand. And so once I was not under the corporate liability of a church, then to comprehend what had been put into me was ever so much easier. And so lucky for me, they kicked me out.
So let me just put this into context, though, because this was hijacked. That's the problem that we had. Yeah. It was hijacked by the group that lives down in Antarctica. That's who hijacked.
Well, that's who it is. That's okay. But I'm just saying,
well, I just wanted to explain. I'm trying to put the bigger picture in which is why we're in the mess we're in today. This is all going back to who came and hijacked humanity and tried to change our DNA, tried to, alter us, and has tried to also depopulate and extinguish us as well, who have used us, used our energy, used our used us as debt slaves. And so I wanted to put this into context. This didn't just get hijacked by a couple of rogue bankers. There's a much bigger, sinister, I would say, agenda behind it, because this seemed like a pretty good plan to me.
Yeah, darn good plan.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, what happened? What went wrong?
Well, like I say, that was the message in that allegory.
Yes.
It was an allegory.
Right.
It was trying to explain things, and it didn't happen just that way. Okay, it's an allegory.
Right.
And so, in the first instance, in creation, there was a lot of conflict, a lot of suffering, a lot of pain that was being produced by the way that old plan went, what was called the everlasting covenant. Okay, and so then Holy Ghost comes along and says, hey, we need to fix that. And so he presented a different method
Mm-hmm.
that would produce the same outcome. And so they got out of that loop. And so then was the institution of the new and everlasting covenant, which prevented all that suffering and everything. So that my point is that's available. It's available. And so so that that's what we're working on. Well, anyway, like I say, I'm just trying to tie together some of the concepts. And one of the really good books that help with this, let me just screen share this. Let's see, where's it at?
That's why you have to know God's really behind this plan
Oh
to
yeah.
eradicate the cabal and get rid of the corrupt aspects of society, because it at this point it was so infiltrated and infested with the corruption that there was no way even the new and everlasting covenant could ever succeed if we didn't get rid of, you know, all this corruption.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty much it. Now this I've recommended this book for a long time. We put it up, I think, several times. If people don't have that, if you just go, you just it's a PDF. You can download it. It's all over the internet.
Is this did you author this?
Oh no, I ain't nearly this smart.
Okay.
Anyway, it's called Interpretive Writings of My Understanding of Redemption. I think there were two authors. Nobody, I mean, one of the guys that wrote it, I'd met a couple of times at some seminars, and he was a student of Roger Elvig, and I think Roger may have proofread this before it went out. May have, I don't know that for a fact, but this is way back. I mean, I first encountered this probably back in 1999, and this is the first information that I received on what's called commercial redemption. So obviously, other people knew this a long time before I did. And then I was facilitated in understanding what's in this book because of my previous theological studies.
Okay.
It was real simple to me. And so again, if you'll take this metaphysical point of view, along with other metaphysical things such as the study of King James or the study of the philosophy of religion at all, it should make pretty good sense. And so this book right here was the first information I had gotten. A friend of mine had sent it to me. He actually printed it out and sent it to me. So, but now it's on electronic. You can find it most anywhere. Now, were these two authors to rewrite this today, would it be different? Not materially, but they would probably add in, more things. Because like this guy says, subject to many constant and unpredictable changes as my understanding grows. Okay, so it was written in 2000. I'm sorry I didn't get it in 1999. I got it later. But anyway, he says subject to constant and unpredictable changes, that's my understanding, grows, and after October 17th, 2000. So were they to rewrite this today, they might add some things in, but primarily it's good for understanding. It's very foundational. Now, what I wanted to do was to refer to some parts of this. I think I wanted to look at this part here to start with. We've spent a lot of time on the private and public. Let me just read a few sentences here. It says everything inside your body is private because only you exist there. And it's a very sanitary environment. Everything outside of you is the public and is full of filth. See, this is why we object to these vaccinations. They're invading the private and they're injecting filth into our bodies, into the bodies of our children, and look what comes from it. It says, everything outside of you is a public jurisdiction full of filth. It is like when the scriptures say sweat and blood. And so he equates this to the two jurisdictions. He says sweat is a public because it shows how much work has been executed to your cells, and blood is the internal and is a fluid operation that gives life. All rights come from the right to privacy. What makes this private is everybody keeps to his or her own business. See? And so, I mean, you can view, like I said, we've talked about public and private, many, many times. This author here, what he's saying is, he says that, everything inside your body is private. Everything on the outside of your body is public. And the public is full of filth. He says sweat is the measurement, it's the metes and bounds. The sweat is the measurement of how much energy has been exerted on the interior private side. So it's a measurement. Sweat is a measurement. Now, the scripture says in the Garden of Gethsemane.
I'm sorry. Isn't that why you can put a sweat equity claim on someone?
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to clarify that for folks.
Because it's a measurement.
Right.
It's a measurement of energy. Mm-hmm. Now, in the Garden of Gethsemane, it says that Jesus sweat blood. Now, I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but if he was sweating blood, he was taking the private into the public for the adjustment of the account. Does that metaphysically make sense?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah. In the Garden of Gethsemane, the scripture says that Jesus sweated blood. Now, if you take that concept of what this fellow here is saying, so if he took the private from inside his body, which was the blood, and he sweated it out as a measurement, then the blood was sweated out of his body to adjust the public account. From a metaphysical point of view, does that make sense? That's what my question is. Is that confusing?
From a commerce perspective, yeah, I would say. Metaphysical, sure, it's just a way to quantify it.
Yeah. And so again, like I say, when I look at the scriptures, when I look at the things that are in there, I'm trying to make sense out of it. And so what sense does it make that someone would sweat out through his pores? I mean, he wasn't cut at that point. He got cut up later,
Right.
But at that point, there'd been no intrusion by a knife or a spear or anything like that. But for whatever his purpose was, through his sweat glands, through his pores, it says that he sweated blood, which means that the private was coming out into the public for the adjustment of the account. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm just trying to relate these
Perfect.
things.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Makes sense.
yeah,
After explaining it, previously the way you just did, and then going, yes, we could get there.
yeah.
We can get there.
Like I say, you're not going to hear this in Sunday school.
No.
But, yeah, but I mean, we've gone far enough now in our understanding that we can start to look at some of these things for for understanding, for further understanding, for a deeper knowledge. Have you ever seen anybody sweat blood? I haven't, but I've
No.
seen them sweat. I've sweated plenty of times.
No.
But again, so there's something different. In other words, the insanity of sweating sweat, something different happened. He
Sweating blood.
sweated blood
Mhm.
to overcome the insanity of the public, if we can say that. So he broke the loop that we had talked about. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if he sweat blood, which was the private, if he took the private and inserted it into the public, it had to be for the adjustment of the account. And then finally, when he gave up the ghost, or in other words, his spirit,
Mhm.
left his physical body, the last words he uttered were, "It is done."
Right.
And that's why all these people talk about, well, he was a yogi and he didn't really die. He just went into stasis. And then on the third day, I mean, they come up with all these crazy excuses for the reality of what happened.
Mhm.
It kind of gets me cranked up sometimes when they start making up these stories. Anyway, let's see. All rights come from the right to privacy. What makes this private is everybody keeps his or her own business. In the public, as for most people involved in the good fight of faith, have come to a great understanding of public court. Don't ask the devil to cast out demons, because they won't.
But it's about contracting, though, isn't it, though, Winston?
Well, yeah, it's by contract and stuff. But what he's basically saying is don't expect the public to solve public problems. Demons don't cast out demons. So again, when you get into the public, you get into that loop, you get into the insanity of doing the same thing, same way, expecting different results. It don't work. What do you have to do in the public in order to correct the accounts? Just like sweat and blood, you have to inject something from the private into the public to make it work. And that's what acceptance for value is. It's extending private credit to set off a public account. Now, how many people that have tried, using acceptance for value and all that kind of stuff know that? This is my point. This is my point, and that's why I had done that workshop, that webinar that time on the metaphysical aspects of acceptance for value. I mean, the technology is one thing, but to understand it and see when you can know about that, what kind of energetics can you generate when you go to use the technology?
Exactly. Now
And
you
it makes a world of difference.
now you can stand on your own
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
argue that point, defend what you're doing in case. But Winston, how many people really on the other side, really know you're in court, and how many people in that courtroom understand it?
Well,
Like,
that's why you have to inject private into the public. Anyway, I wanted to like I say, people can go and download this book. We don't need to put it up. If they really want to, if they really want to study this,
mm-hmm.
go download it off the internet.
Okay,
Put a little bit of effort into it. And then I wanted to refer to
okay.
some other parts. I mean, we could spend all day on just one of these chapters in this
This looks
book.
great. Yeah, this looks great.
Let's see, I'm going to page. Let's see if I can make it go a little bit faster here. Oop, too far. Yeah, okay, getting close.
Mm.
Okay, the title of this chapter here is repaying creates a futures contract. Now, this is an interesting chapter. This is really an interesting chapter. And we don't, we could probably spend an hour, 2 hours on this chapter. And so people really need to study this. Anyway, repaying is very simple. The entire economy is already prepaid because it is the manufacturing that pays for it. It says look to the note or the present liability of the earth rather than the bond, which is the future liability for payment. So he said, look at it this way. He says, we have a car sitting on a dealer's lot. You walk up to buy the car. Does the dealer ever tell you, I am glad you're going to buy this car because we have to find out how much we're going to pay for this car to be built? They don't say that. Okay? No. No is the answer you would get, but that is exactly what they are doing when you go to the bank to get a loan to pay for the treasury bill that built the car. Now, that treasury bill that was provided to the manufacturer, GMC, Ford, or whoever, the treasury bill was funded by what?
Treasury bills are funded by the
by a bond.
Treasury, by the Treasury.
By a bond.
Yeah, it's a bond. Treasury bill.
No. The bill is not a bond. Okay, so when a manufacturer like Ford, GMC, or whoever wants to go out and manufacture cars, they go with a bill. They go to the Treasury, and the Treasury issues Treasury bills. But my question is, what guarantees the Treasury bill that the Treasury sells?
Well,
it's
it has
a bond.
to be a bond, yeah.
No, well, yeah, it could be called a Treasury bond. But what is that Treasury bond that you're talking about there?
Those are U.S. bonds.
Your birth certificate.
Oh, yeah.
Everything on the planet is funded by your birth certificate.
Right, because we're traded on the stock market. That's why. Yes.
Among other
commodity.
things.
Yeah, we're commodities. Exactly.
No, we are not commodities. Our labor.
Well,
that we put into it.
Yes.
The sweat that we put into it, that
sweat,
is the commodity.
Our sweat equity. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
our discussion last time on equity interest recovery was very apropos. You have to put all these things together to get a full picture on it.
Right. But yes, you're correct. I mean, more specifically, it's basically our future sweat equity. That's what's.
Yeah, it creates a future.
Right.
He calls it future liability. That's what a bond is. The bond the bond may never be called. But in the event it is called, it creates a future liability. See, so for instance, let's say that a bill was issued. GMC built a great big factory, was going to start producing cars and everything, and all of a sudden there was an earthquake and the whole building fell down. Now what? Then you go to the bond, which entertains the concept of a future liability. So that's just how things work. All right. It says, see, with public policy, the Treasury bill is both a bill and a bond. So when I give them my bond, which is a payment, that creates two bonds, making the payment on the one product. This shows that my payment is being invested into a futures contract, which he says is called a false profit.
Really?
Now, in the Old Testament, according to the law, what did they do with a false prophet? They stoned it to death. Hey, it's just kind of fun, to look at some of these things in this manner.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So it says the manufacturing company already paid for the car to get it built. Proof the car was paid for is that it's sitting on the dealer's lot. When do they ever build something and then talk about how they're going to finance it to be built? See? So the product was paid for when the contract was put in place to collect the industrial recourses. And he goes into some of be pretty tough to understand. But anyway, it says even more precisely, the item was paid when the census did a per capita poll to identify how much money these agencies should put into the economy based on our productivity. See, this whole currency reset and what is the revaluation? People call it wrong. The RV was what was done in Reno. Commercial redemption is not RV, but people refer to it as RV. But what the heck? Anyway, all right. So, what were the elements that would cause a currency to be rated higher than a neighboring country's currency? Productivity of the people. It's a futures expectation, just like those Zimbabwe bonds that everybody's so excited about. See, that was a guarantee. That was a future expectation. Now, what is the value of Zimbabwe? It's not a whole lot unless you go digging in the ground and get them minerals out and use them. Mm-hmm. So that's why they created Zimbabwe bonds rather than Zimbabwe currency. And they were using the bonds as currency. It's the same thing with our Federal Reserve notes. They're not notes. They're perpetual annuity bonds. It's always the futures that they're talking about. Now these new United States notes are different. They're going to be a true note. They're not going to be a bond like the Federal Reserve perpetual annuity bonds were and so forth. Anyway, going along here, it says, okay, so again, the planners, except for the crooks and the criminals, but those who were planning for the finances of this country, they evaluated based on actuarial tables as to how long people typically would live and be productive. Productive is the key element here. In other words, how long will they live and insert energy into the economy? And so most people, that I don't know what, during those early, when I was born in 1948, probably the life expectancy of most people would be, I don't know, for men, 75 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. For women, it was a few years more than that. But how long, during that 75 years, how long would they be productive?
Right.
And so if you start at the age of 18 years when the high school graduate would get out and go to work or something like that, and then, how many years would they actually be working until, that they weren't productive and they had to be, gotten rid of, they got to retire or something. Mm-hmm. And then from that, then they determined how much preparation they would need for Social Security retirement. See, these things are all planned. I mean, they're trying to make a system which is viable. And like I say, without perversion of the system, I think it probably would have worked pretty well. The people who did all this were smart people, a lot smarter than I am. So they had to figure out, okay, how much money is needed. Now, see, here's where the problem came in, was mortgages. Let's say, for instance, you're going to buy a house over here for $100,000. So you give them a note for $100,000, and they create $100,000 in money legally. But what is it that they don't create? The $200,000 is going to take to pay the interest on the 30-year mortgage. That's what they don't create, and that's what caused the conflict. Is that in order to keep your mortgage current and come up with the extra $200,000 that was not created by your note, where does that $200,000 come from?
You.
Well, so people go into competition for the existing amount of money. And that's why you got, 5% of the population living like kings. And you got, let's say, I don't know what the poverty level is in this country or what percentage it is, but let's just say, 25% of the people are living in abject poverty. Why is that? Interest. See, you remember last time I was talking about what Keith Scott had come up with as far as putting together a program of taking the friggin' banks out of the equation.
Right.
He was going to use the post office to monetize the note, and the mortgage was interest free. But the payment on the note, the payment on the mortgage, will be going into the national treasury to make the country stronger. See, so again, like I say, when you start to analyze what's happened and how a system that was created could have worked if we'd have kept the friggin' criminals out of it.
Right.
It would have worked. It would have worked. See? And so now we're having to do a correction. A correction to what? A correction to correct financial commercial principles. That's why I say I object to that word collapse, because in reality, we're talking about a correction. There's nothing wrong with the system. There's nothing wrong with it. Like I always say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, because you just muck things up. So what's happening when we talk about draining the swamp? It's getting the criminals out of our commerce that have created the problems.
Right.
That's what it means to drain the swamp. You see. And so, people should have good hearts and have good feelings about what's happening. I mean, whether you like personalities or not, is not the question. The question is the problem being corrected? And then I mean, who can object to that? I mean, he went right at Trump went right after the Federal Reserve.
He did.
Could he have gone after him if me and Keith Scott hadn't done that lean back in 2012?
No, because they couldn't renew their charter.
Exactly.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So some of us work in the background to drain the swamp, and some are in the public eye. But I guarantee you right now, he couldn't be doing what he's doing right now with the Fed unless what me and Keith had done way back in 2012. You see what I mean?
Right.
So like I say,
thank you, Winston. Thank you for
you're
stepping
welcome.
in and doing that.
You're welcome.
On everyone's behalf. Thank you.
Yeah. It's just stuff we do. Now, if I hadn't done it, maybe somebody else would have. But I just happened to be the guy at the time. That's all. There ain't nothing special about me.
So humble, Winston.
Well, except hillbillies rule.
Far too much.
Hillbillies rule. When the Grand Master gets involved in it, buddy, things are going to change.
Come on, viewers. We got to get back up to 12,000 subscribers so we can see Winston do his ham bone. Come on. Don't you want to see it?
That's what it's going to take. I'm just joking with you, but all these things work together. Anyway, you can read the rest of this one chapter, and then there's one other, because we get close to the time here, but there's one other chapter I was going to go into a little bit more. Very basic accounting. And he's going over what we were talking about here with some of the stuff we looked at, and all this stuff. So anyway, it's a real good chapter. The whole book's real good, and you can get ever so much understanding and knowledge out of it. Like I say, and if you'll take what this individual puts out, because he brings in a lot of the concept out of the scriptures, a lot of them, and and if people are familiar with the King James, and have studied into a lot of those things, and for the most part, the preachers and the religionists and so forth has got everybody all mixed up. And so if you take the elements that you have studied and can fold them into some of these things here, then it'll be, ever so much good for you. so that's pretty much what I had today. Like I say, we don't have time to go into it much more deeply
Mm.
than we have so far. But that book's available. Go and get it.
Yeah, no, it looks like a great read, and I think
Oh
everybody
yeah,
should
man.
definitely get it and study it. No, absolutely. If you want to, you know, get to a certain level of understanding of these things. So I appreciate that, Winston, because really, basically, you just explained uh, why we're having this correction,
Yeah,
which is a
yeah.
good, yeah. So you
Like,
really did
like
answer
I
that question
say,
for the
I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now that's just a common
hillbilly
term
saying.
that you hear people say.
The
If it
hillbilly
ain't broke,
saying.
don't fix it.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you my experience. And that was, when I was a young person, uh, uh, my father, he never worked on his own car, whatever his reason. I mean, the only thing he would do was he might change a flat tire, but as far as even to changing the oil
Mhm.
or changing the spark plugs on it, he never did it.
Mm,
And so consequently, I never learned that.
mm,
And so, knowing that, not knowing how to work on a car, in
mm.
1973, I went and bought a brand new car. And so, as it turned out, I was taking a mechanics course, kind of a correspondence kind of, because I thought I needed to know that stuff. You see, so I was taking this course, and so I didn't have an old jalopy to work on. I just had this brand new car. So I thought, well, I'll go out here and do all this monkeying around on this brand new car. That was stupid. That
Oh no.
really stupid, man. I just about ruined it, screwing with it. And so again, going back to the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can
Exactly.
tell you right now, if you got something that works, don't screw with it because the bad things that come from it. But we have had see. I'm not opposed to the system. I'm not opposed to the gold certificates, the
Yeah,
the birth certificate. I'm not opposed to any of that if it's properly used.
right.
I
Sure.
have no problem. It's a good system.
Right.
I've said that all along.
Mhm.
And so, but people generally don't understand it.
Right.
And then when some yahoo gets up and starts whining and crying about the system and going on and on about this, that, and the other, then people have a misperception about it. And so then once they have that misperception, they think, well, somebody done something mean to me, so I got to fight about it. Uh-uh. So all this going on right now. That's why I call it a correction. And we ought to be behind and support the correction.
It
See?
almost seems to me that you can't really make the correction only in the financial system when the
No.
when the courts are themselves working for as a bank, and you have a system that there's no real justice because it's for sale. It's been for sale in this country. And so have our, according to this, oh boy, people get ready. According to this unclassified FISA application, you're
Yeah.
going you're going to see a lot more of that. There was an awful lot of selling of secrets from Hillary Clinton, despite, as I reported in our POTUS report on Monday, despite there being risks of espionage, security risks of having these private servers. And of course, she was apparently, allegedly, until we see this released to the public. I did have some inside information on it, but until it's released to the public, we're not going to. Then everyone will see that what Hillary Clinton was actually doing was uh, selling our classified information. These servers contained information about special access programs, which were way above
Top secret.
security clearance. Even the president, she had no business having this. As a result of that, our operatives, 21 of them, were killed in China.
Yeah, that's murder.
So yeah, exactly. So this is what I'm saying, is that we can't just. Sadly, this whole financial system corrupted so many people. Why? I'm not going to weigh in on that here, but it's almost as if this correction has to happen
Yeah.
in many different facets. So that's why we're seeing in another POTUS report I had screen shared almost 3,000 a a spreadsheet of almost 3,000 uh, individuals, and I would say they were chiefs of police, they were judges, they were politicians, they were CEOs worldwide who were basically forced to resign
Yeah.
in order to help make this correction happen. Because we can't simply, Winston, and you'll agree, we can't simply make a financial correction when the corruption was had spread, it metastasized.
Yeah, they need to get rid of some of them people and go out and get some hillbillies and put them in those positions.
Or grandmas, as James Gilliland would say. He says, "I want to."
Grandmas.
He says, "I want a council. I want a counselor government of grandmas."
Yeah.
He's
Well, it'd
right.
be much better than what we got.
Yeah, exactly.
Get rid of some of this insanity.
I agree. Yes, I agree. So, folks, keep your eye out for our next POTUS report, because by then, hopefully, we'll see what has been declassified, so that we could see what was going on. And of course, everything she was selling, she was getting the money, receiving it through the Clinton Foundation. So this is
Yeah.
huge. This is so huge. It's so huge. So it's going to be well, I don't know. For some, it's going to be that suppository, Winston. For others, it's that red pill. We've been choking that down for a while now. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you for this. This was wonderful. I really hope that people got to see the name of the book as we were screen sharing
Yeah.
the book, because as Winston
And
says,
go on your browser and type in interpretive writings. It'll pop right up. A lot of people put it up on the internet.
okay, because I think a lot of people are going to want to take a look at that book. So
Yeah.
thank you for introducing it to us and sharing that with
We
us.
talked about it several times so far.
Yeah.
But like I say, and then we posted it, along with the interviews and stuff. But it's really easy to get. We don't need to post it again.
Okay.
We expect people to use about maybe 3 or 4 drops of sweat to get it.
There you go. Put some sweat into it. Thanks, Winston. Well, thank you very much again, and as always, for your wisdom, Winston's wisdom. That's what I should rename this, but Country Roads works really good.
Oh, don't give me a whole lot of credit for it. Like I say, I kind of go like with what the Buddhists say, that we don't really learn anything. We simply remember what we have forgotten. And that's what I think that's been pretty much what's happened with me.
Interesting.
What was, when I come upon things
Mm-hmm.
and I start to put things together, I'm simply remembering what I've known other places, other time, in other situations.
Right.
And so you can't really give me credit for any of this, or any of us really, because we're simply drawing from
Mm-hmm.
things, if you want to call it collective consciousness, if you want to call it from the Akashic records or whatever.
Right.
We're simply drawing into our present circumstance, these things. So I'm not telling anything that Winston created.
Well, I don't know, Winston. I mean, even if it's in the Akashic record, you'd think because we did it already, why would we have to do it again?
I don't know the answer to that, but
Okay.
you have to go metaphysical to figure that out.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you, Winston. And I hope you have a great weekend, and
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. And to all of our viewers, we hope you have a wonderful weekend also. And we'll be back on Monday with another POTUS report. So it should be very interesting. And take a look at our 24/7 news page on Facebook. It's open to the public. And we do have a Facebook group as well, which is private, though it's a closed one. So, it's not very different. But if you really want to keep up on the latest news, it's all published on the news page, and it is a lot of work to maintain that, but it's well worth it. It's a service to humanity that we're giving as a higher calling. And if you have a higher calling, do what you can to help support the GoldFish Report and keep us going, because we are in for we're here for you, and if this is a value to you, then you can show us that by helping to support us. And to our viewers who send us stories, thank you, because you know that I'm posting them on our news page. So I appreciate all of your comments and all of your messages that you all send. Really wonderful people who are our viewers. We really absolutely love you all, and we are very grateful for you. So thank you for that. And Winston, thank you. We're grateful for
Yeah.
you too, my friend.
Okay, then we'll see you again next time.
Okay, have a nice weekend. This concludes this edition of the Goldfish Report.